What's up, folks? So I was fortunate enough to take a nice buck in Michigan with my Marlin 44 mag. When I took that shot, it went through both lungs and I didn't even touch the heart. So today I'm going to try something totally different and I'm going to eat a deer heart. I've never done it before. I've never even taken the heart out of a deer. I've killed a whole lot of deer, and to me, heart and liver and all that stuff, it's guts. I've never considered eating it. I don't like the taste of liver, but I've heard that heart meat can be really, really good. So this is a little bit new, a little bit different, a little bit experimental, but I'm gonna try it. So I already cleaned off the valves and ventricles and kind of all the junk on the outside of it. There's some kind of hard fat around the outside, almost like the tallow that you find on the rump of the deer. Carved all that off, and I had this soaking in cool salt water to kind of pull some of the blood out of it. I do that, I wet age all my meat. It pulls some of the acid and some of the blood out of it, and I think that will be especially beneficial with the heart. Let's see how it goes.
So after removing the external fat and kind of all the arteries and all the junk hanging out of it, I plopped it down on the cutting board to start slicing it up. A lot of wild game meat, including venison, can be fantastic if you cook it right, but the second you overcook it, it can get really tough. So that's why my strategy here was to cut it into thin medallion type of strips. That way I could flash fry it in a pan and just barely sear the outside of it, and it would be cooked enough and I wouldn't risk overcooking it. So I sliced it crossways down the entire length of the heart. So the first couple slices felt almost just like I was slicing a tomato or a piece of fruit. Then as I worked down the heart, they started to get a little bit more dense and a little bit chunkier. As I was cutting through the very last section on the very tip of the heart, I felt my knife kind of touch something. And when I looked inside there, I actually found a tiny piece of copper, which I think was actually part of the jacket that had flown off the bullet, which was interesting because my bullet never actually penetrated the heart. So part of this jacket must have broken off and just flown through it. I piled up the slices, and then I kind of noticed this fibrous material on the inside of the valves. I don't know exactly what it was, but didn't look like something I wanted to eat. Looks kind of like connective tissue, but a little bit different. This heart tissue was not something I had seen before. But anyway, I trimmed that off, and that's what you see on the top right, that little pile there. I ended up with some nice, clean, beautiful looking medallion pieces and got them all stacked up, and the next step was to season them. For my seasoning, I didn't want to overdo it, but I wanted to do something that was pretty well proven for wild game for me. So I sprinkled a little bit of table salt on there, and then grabbed some Tony Chachere's Creole seasoning just to give it a little bit of spice, sprinkled that on there. Then I flipped the meat over and did the exact same thing on the other side. In hindsight, I would be a little bit more cautious with the salt just because I had already brined this, so it already had a little bit of salt, and so this ended up being a little bit too much. Not bad, but I'd do a little bit less than I just did. After seasoning the meat, the next step was to give it a light coat of flour. On the first piece, of course, I made a huge mess. Flour went everywhere, but I was gonna have to clean up anyway, so I just kept going. I kind of lightly flipped it around in the flour just to give it a nice even coating. My goal here was not to make a real heavy, thick batter on it, just to lightly flour the meat, just so it would brown nicely in a pan. I then finished out all the other sections in the same manner. The next step was to actually get cooking. I got out my Lodge cast iron skillet and melted some butter in the pan and got that warming up on the stove. Then I tossed the pieces into the pan, and you can really hear it start sizzling. Of course, I wasn't working from any kind of actual recipe. I was going for something kind of along the lines of schnitzel, but I figured if you put a little bit of Tony's, a little bit of salt, and cook something in butter, it'd be hard to make it taste bad. So that was kind of my strategy here, and I just wanted to kind of brown the meat on this side, let it cook just a little bit, not too much, and then flip it and do the same on the other side. I would recommend using a high temperature cooking oil instead of butter. Using butter, it tasted great ultimately, but it got really smoky. So I'd use something a little bit different just to prevent smoking up your whole kitchen. After the meat was nice and browned, I pulled it out and did the same with the next section. I was really just trying to get a nice crispy sear on the outside of this meat, but I did not want to overcook it. So I browned it, and then afterwards I just put it in the oven, set it 250 degrees just to warm through. That way I wasn't going to continue cooking the meat and make it tough. It sat in the oven for about 10 minutes, so it was warm throughout just enough to be safe, and so it was now time to go ahead and try a bite.
Alright, so I fried it up, put it in the warm oven just to kind of warm through. A lot of wild game, it's really important not to overcook it, especially venison since it's so lean. And I figured this heart has no fat in it at all. It's just lean meat, so I figured that was especially the case. So if anything, it's undercooked, and so that's why it's just keeping in the oven just to warm through a little bit. So I've got a little piece right here. It's kind of a medium rare to medium rare. That's really good. It was way softer and more tender than I imagined. I was worried that it was gonna be tough. That's very good. I have never kept venison heart before. I gotta get some more. I've never kept venison heart before, but I don't think I'm gonna let it go to waste now. Especially, cooked like that, still nice and pink, not bloody, and I think that's part of the benefit of sitting in the bag of salt water to kind of brine out. It's not bloody, but it's very soft and tender. And cooked in this kind of, I guess, schnitzel style. Figured what game meat isn't good when you cook it in cast iron with salt and pepper. That's really good. Well, hope you enjoyed this, something different. I don't make a bunch of cooking videos, but this was kind of an experiment for me. So if you've never considered keeping deer heart, like I hadn't before, I now know that it's absolutely worth keeping. I'm gonna pull it out of the next one. Till next time, stay safe, be free, and never stop seeking adventure.